The cold winds howled across the barren wasteland, a never-ending desert of icy sand and jagged rocks. Zara's body, broken and bruised from years of abuse, lay motionless on the ground. She had been discarded like a piece of worthless trash, deemed useless by the alien king who had once claimed her as his property. Her heart raced weakly in her chest, every breath more difficult than the last. The king had been kind enough to promise her death as an act of mercy, leaving her to the merciless elements. But now, all she could do was wait for the cold to claim her as the inevitable end. Her mind wandered back to the days of servitude under the king, who had once believed she had value. But the moment she could no longer serve his needs, she was thrown away, nothing more than a discarded tool. As her vision blurred and the sound of her heartbeat grew fainter, she thought she saw a figure in the distance. At first, it was just a blur, a shadow among shadows. But as the figure grew closer, a sense of disbelief surged through her tired body. A human, no, a soldier, emerged from the snowstorm, his silhouette outlined against the harsh, unforgiving sky. With swift movements, he activated a cloaking device, momentarily disappearing before reappearing right beside her. His hand reached down, offering a gloved palm to her, his face hidden beneath a helmet but his eyes soft and determined. "I'm not leaving you here," he said simply. Zara, too weak to respond, could only stare up at him in shock. It wasn't the typical reaction she expected from someone of his species. He should have killed her, or worse, left her to die in this frozen desert. But he didn't. Zara, still struggling to hold on to life, didn't know how to feel. He could have ignored her, like everyone else. Instead, this human soldier was offering her a chance at survival. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they made contact with his. She was alive, by some miracle. She was still alive. But at what cost? Her heart raced with new possibilities. Was this soldier an enemy? A savior? Or something else entirely? The answer, she realized, would come soon enough. Her body felt too heavy to move, but she was no longer alone. With a gentle but firm grip, the soldier lifted her from the ground, carrying her into the unknown. Zara closed her eyes, not knowing where he was taking her or what fate had in store. But for the first time in years, she dared to hope. The human soldier, whose name was Lucas, was part of a special operations unit sent to investigate the desert world. His mission was clear: gather intelligence on the alien king who had been causing havoc on nearby systems. But finding Zara, a woman who had been discarded like a broken tool, was not part of the plan. Lucas knew what he had to do. He had a duty to his people, but something in him couldn't let this alien woman suffer alone. He didn't know why, but he couldn't just leave her there to die. She wasn't like the stories he had heard about the alien species, the brutal, heartless rulers that had conquered and enslaved countless worlds. No, there was something different about Zara. He wasn't a diplomat, nor a hero, but in that moment, Lucas had made up his mind. Zara would not die on this desolate planet. If he had to risk everything, he would take her with him, no matter the cost. But as they made their way through the frozen desert, the sound of the approaching alien forces grew louder. The alien king was not one to accept defeat easily, and his army would stop at nothing to retrieve Zara. They were relentless. Machines and robots of terrifying size and power, sent to track down and reclaim what had been lost. Lucas knew he was being hunted. The king would come for them, no matter where they went. The air around them began to hum with tension, and the first blasts of laser fire rang out in the distance. Lucas immediately activated his cloaking device, blending into the landscape like a shadow. Zara, still weak from her ordeal, could barely stand, but Lucas was there, supporting her, guiding her through the cold winds and snowstorms. As the blasts from the alien forces grew louder, Lucas knew their time was running out. He wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that he had a target on his back, or that he was now responsible for a woman who had no place in his world. A world where humanity had fought to survive for centuries, now faced with a technologically advanced enemy. And yet, As the snow fell around them, Lucas realized something profound. Zara wasn't just some alien creature. She was a person, just like him. She had been wronged by the king, and it was Lucas's responsibility to make sure she never had to face such cruelty again. For days, Lucas and Zara moved deeper into the unknown, constantly on the run. The alien forces were closing in. Each time, Lucas used his stealth and advanced combat skills to evade capture, but he knew they couldn't outrun the alien army forever. They had to make a stand, or they would both be lost. Zara, still fragile from her ordeal, began to show signs of something more than just weakness. There was a power inside her, a hidden strength that had been suppressed by the alien king's control. As they encountered more and more of the king's robotic soldiers, Zara began to tap into this power. The first time it happened, she saved Lucas's life. As they were cornered by a group of robotic enforcers, Zora's eyes glowed with a mysterious light. A pulse of energy shot from her hands, disintegrating the robots in an instant. Lucas was stunned. He had no idea she had this power, but he was grateful. It meant they had a chance. Together, they could take on the king's forces and put an end to his reign of terror. But it wouldn't be easy. They were outnumbered, and the alien king himself had not yet entered the fray. The final battle was about to begin. The alien king, a towering figure of dark energy and malice, had finally arrived. His robotic soldiers parted as he stepped forward, a crown of glowing metal resting atop his head. His eye-controlled forces, the most advanced in the galaxy, were more than a match for Lucas and Zara. But the soldiers' determination and Zara's newfound power gave them hope. As the king's army descended upon them, the air crackled with energy. Lucas fought with everything he had, using cloaking devices and advanced combat tactics to hold his ground. But the alien king was a force to be reckoned with. His robotic soldiers were relentless, and it seemed like victory was slipping from their grasp. That was until Zara, standing beside Lucas, tapped into the depths of her power. With a cry, she unleashed a devastating wave of energy, sending the king's forces scattering. In the final moments of the battle, Lucas and Zara combined their strengths to defeat the alien king once and for all. The king's control over his AI army collapsed, and with it, his empire crumbled. The victory was hard-won, but it was theirs. With the alien king's reign of terror brought to an end, Zara was no longer a slave. She was free. The soldier who had risked everything to save her stood beside her, offering her a future she had once believed impossible. There would be challenges ahead, but they would face them together. In the final scene, Lucas and Zara stood on the edge of a cliff, overlooking the horizon. The harsh winds had died down, and a new beginning was on the horizon. Together, they would forge a life on Earth, one filled with hope and the promise of a better future. No longer would Zara be a discarded tool. She was a survivor, a warrior in her own right, and now she was Lucas's equal. And in that moment, they knew, no matter what came next, they would face it side by side. The harsh wind blew the fine snow into her face, biting at her skin with a cold so fierce it felt like knives. Zara's body was numb, her limbs heavy from days of exposure to the elements. The once proud woman had been reduced to a shell of herself, an alien slave, abandoned on this desolate planet by the very being she had once served. The alien king had seen her as worthless, no longer valuable for his cruel purposes. Her usefulness had expired, and with it, so had her life in his eyes. She had been left behind to perish, alone in the freezing wasteland. No one would come for her. No one cared. Zara collapsed onto the icy ground, her vision growing blurry. She had accepted it. Death was near. It was the end of the line for her. And yet, she didn't fear it anymore. The life she had known, full of servitude, pain, and hopelessness, had broken her down until there was nothing left but emptiness. The cold numbness in her limbs was a welcome relief to the torment she had endured for so long. It was only a matter of time now. But as her breath slowed and the world around her seemed to vanish into nothingness, she heard a sound. At first, it was distant, like a muffled thud against the raging wind. Then, the sound became clearer, growing closer. Footsteps. Someone was coming. Her fading eyes tried to focus, but her body was too weak to react. What did it matter? It was probably just another cruel soul sent to finish the job, to leave her body to the wolves. She braced herself for whatever came next, but instead, there was a voice. Hey, are you all right? The voice was deep, strong, and strangely kind. Zara's blurry vision caught a glimpse of a figure standing over her. His face was hidden behind a helmet, and his body was encased in dark armor. His presence was almost otherworldly, like something she had only heard about in the stories. A human soldier. She had heard of their kind, but never had she imagined one would find her in such a place, let alone offer help. Her heart pounded in disbelief. The soldier knelt beside her, his movements deliberate and careful. With practiced hands, he began to scan her body with some kind of device. "You're in bad shape," he muttered, though his tone was oddly calm for someone facing what was clearly a hopeless situation. "But I'm not leaving you here." Zara's mind raced. Was this a dream? A final hallucination before she passed? She had been trained to distrust humans. They were nothing but pests to the advanced alien species like the king, easy to crush beneath a heel. Yet here was this human, offering her his help. It didn't make sense. Who are you?" She managed to rasp, her voice weak and barely audible. "I'm Lucas, part of an elite squad from Earth." His voice was firm, but there was a tenderness in it that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. "I'm going to get you out of here." Zara couldn't understand it. He had no reason to help her. She wasn't his responsibility, and yet he was making it his mission to save her. It was beyond anything she could grasp in her fragile state. She had expected to die alone, but this soldier, this stranger, was offering her a chance at life. Lucas didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he pulled a small device from his belt and activated it. A shimmering field of light surrounded them for a moment, and when it dissipated, it was as though the world had shifted. The soldier had cloaked them both, and now they were invisible to anyone who might be searching for them. Zara felt a sudden surge of hope, though it was quickly smothered by the overwhelming pain in her body. As Lucas carefully lifted her into his arms, she instinctively flinched, expecting the touch of a captor. But instead there was nothing but gentleness in his hands. His touch was warm, and his posture was protective. For the first time in as long as she could remember, Zara felt as though she might be safe. "Hold on," Lucas whispered. "I've got you." Zara could barely keep her eyes open. The pain was too much, and yet she couldn't ignore the overwhelming sense that something had shifted. There was a chance, no, more than a chance, that she could survive, that she could leave the life she had known behind and start anew. But that was a foolish thought. The alien king would never allow her to escape. She was his property, and he would hunt her down, no matter where she went. But Lucas didn't seem to care about the risks. He was carrying her through the snow, moving with determination, his mind focused on getting them both to safety. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, Zara began to hear the faint sounds of distant gunfire, blasts from the alien forces. They were coming. The king's robotic enforcers were already tracking them, no doubt. "You're not going to get away with this," Zara muttered, her voice weak but full of defiance. She had no idea who Lucas was or why he was risking his life for her, but she knew the consequences of crossing the alien king. And Lucas was now a target, just like her. Lucas didn't flinch. "I didn't come here to make excuses. I came to get you out of this hellhole. And that's exactly what I'm going to do." Zara studied him for a long moment. He wasn't afraid of her. He didn't even seem afraid of the king's wrath. She couldn't fathom it. Humans were supposed to be weak, easily crushed under the weight of a true power like the king. But Lucas wasn't backing down. There was strength in him, an unwavering resolve that made Zora question everything she had been taught about her species' superiority. "I'm not some fragile thing you need to protect," Zora whispered, though the words felt hollow in her mouth. Her body was still weak, and she had no energy to argue. She needed rest. "I'm not here to protect you because you're weak," Lucas said with a quiet smile. "I'm here because I believe you deserve a chance at something better. And I'm not leaving without you." Zora blinked, her mind racing. A chance at something better. Was that even possible for someone like her? Could she, an abandoned slave, find a life where she wasn't hunted or used? As Zara struggled to sit up, Lucas helped her to her feet, his eyes scanning the horizon. The storm had passed, but there was still a chill in the air, one that cut right through to the bone. They couldn't stay here. The alien forces would be searching every inch of this planet, and hiding in caves wouldn't be enough. They needed to move fast, and they needed to find a way off this godforsaken world. "I'm ready," Zora said softly, her voice still shaky, but there was a glimmer of determination in her eyes. She wasn't the same woman who had been abandoned and left for dead in the snow. The look in her eyes said it all. She was stronger now, fueled by the possibility of freedom. And Lucas would make sure she got it. He nodded, his lips tight with resolve. "We'll get through this. Together." The journey through the harsh, unforgiving landscape was grueling. Every step was a reminder of the dangers that awaited them. The alien forces had far superior technology. Drones that could scan the area for miles, AI-controlled tracking devices that could zero in on Zara's last known location. And that was only the beginning. Lucas knew that it was only a matter of time before they were found. Zara stumbled beside him, her breath coming in short bursts, but she refused to stop. Despite the physical toll the journey was taking on her, her spirit burned with a new intensity. The soldier had given her a chance, something she hadn't had in years, and she wasn't about to squander it. The alien forces were closing in. Lucas had been trained for this moment, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer determination he saw in Zora's eyes. She was no longer just a victim, a helpless woman who had been discarded. She was a fighter. And for the first time in a long time, Lucas felt like he wasn't the only one leading the charge. But the stakes were high. The alien machines, silent, deadly, and relentless, were only a few miles away now. Lucas could feel the pressure building in his chest. They were being hunted. Then the first drone appeared. It was a small black object hovering high in the sky, its mechanical limbs clicking as it surveyed the ground below. Lucas froze, his heart racing. He didn't have the luxury of time. He needed to act fast. Without a word, he activated his cloaking device again, disappearing into the background. Zara looked at him in confusion, but he motioned for her to do the same. She didn't need to be told twice. The cloak worked, at first. They moved quietly through the snow, staying low to avoid detection. The drone passed over them, unaware of their presence. But Lucas knew it was only a matter of time before they were spotted again. The cloaking device had a limited range, and there were too many drones in the air. They couldn't stay hidden forever. The drone hovered for a moment longer, its sensors scanning the area. And then it took off again, zooming away at high speed. Lucas exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But his relief was short-lived. In the distance, another drone appeared, and then another. The hunt was on. They had been spotted. "Move," Lucas hissed, grabbing Zora's hand and pulling her along behind him. They had to outrun them. There was no time to waste. As they ran through the snow, the sound of mechanical engines grew louder, and Lucas could see the drones coming back, their red lights flashing. The machines were fast, faster than he had anticipated. He could hear the faint hum of their engines, the sound of their artificial intelligence analyzing the situation, calculating the best way to track them down. Zora was starting to slow down. Her energy was draining, and Lucas could see the exhaustion in her eyes. But she wouldn't stop. She couldn't. Not when they were so close to escape. Lucas kept his focus on the horizon, his mind running through the plans he had formulated. But every plan had one thing in common. The clock was ticking. The alien machines would catch up. It wasn't a question of if, but when. They were being hunted, and Lucas knew they had to make their stand before the machines closed in. The hunt had begun, and there was no turning back. The chase had been relentless, and the sky above them seemed to grow darker with every passing moment. Lucas and Zara were running out of time. The drone's flashing red lights were getting closer, and the sound of their engines was now unmistakable, echoing through the desolate, snow-covered landscape. Every step felt like a heartbeat away from being caught. The cold wind whipped at their faces, but it was the fear in Lucas's chest that made his heart race faster. "We can't outrun them," Zora gasped, her breath clouding in the freezing air. Her legs were aching, her body already pushed beyond its limits. Despite her strength and determination, the toll of the long journey was catching up to her. Lucas glanced over at her. Her face was pale, her breath shallow, but there was a fire in her eyes, a fierce resolve he couldn't ignore. He knew they couldn't keep running forever. The cloaking device had already been used multiple times, and they couldn't rely on it to hide them any longer. They were out of options. It was time to make their stand. "We don't need to outrun them," Lucas said through gritted teeth. "We just need to fight." Zara turned her head, wide-eyed with disbelief. "Fight? We're being hunted by machines, Lucas. We're outnumbered." He nodded, already thinking ahead, his mind racing through every tactical option. He wasn't a soldier who ran from a fight. He had been in impossible situations before, and he would find a way to win. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about making sure that Zara, the woman who had been cast aside like a worthless object, would not become prey to a corrupt empire. She deserved more than that. And Lucas wasn't about to let her down. "I didn't come all this way to let them take you," he said, his voice full of determination. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through him, sharpening his focus. "Get ready." They found a small ridge that overlooked a narrow valley, the perfect spot for an ambush. The drones were closing in, their engines humming louder. Lucas quickly scanned his surroundings, searching for anything that might give them the edge. A few scattered rocks and jagged ice formations. Not much to work with, but it would have to do. "Zara, stay low and move quietly," Lucas instructed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll handle the rest. Just stay close." She nodded, though she looked hesitant. Zara wasn't used to fighting, and the idea of going up against machines designed for war made her heart race with fear. But she knew this was their only chance. She had no choice but to trust Lucas. He had already risked his life to get her this far. She wasn't about to give up now. The first drone appeared over the ridge. Its sleek black form was almost ghost-like in the cold, its mechanical limbs silently skimming the air as it scanned the ground below. Lucas's pulse quickened, but he didn't move. He held his breath, waiting for the right moment. The drone hovered just above them, its sensors sweeping the valley. Then, as it moved closer, Lucas sprang into action. He lunged from behind a boulder, his rifle raised, and aimed with deadly precision. The first shot hit the drone square in its underbelly, sending a burst of sparks into the air. The machine shuddered, its wings flapping erratically as it lost control. It fell, crashing into the snow with a deafening thud. Zara's heart leaped in her chest. She had never seen Lucas in action like this before, calm, focused, and deadly. But she didn't have time to admire him. More drones were coming. She could hear their engines, feel the air vibrating as they approached. There was no time to waste. Lucas motioned for her to move, and she followed him, her breath coming in ragged bursts. The ground was uneven, covered in ice and snow, making every step a challenge. But they couldn't afford to slow down. The fight had just begun. Another drone appeared, this one larger and more heavily armored. It zoomed toward them with lightning speed, its red eyes flashing like a predator locking onto its prey. Lucas fired again, but the shot glanced off the drone's armor, barely leaving a scratch. He cursed under his breath, realizing they would need something more to bring it down. "Zara, get behind those rocks," Lucas shouted, pointing to a nearby outcrop. "I'll take care of this one." Zara didn't hesitate. She sprinted to cover, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the hum of the drone's engines growing louder. Lucas wasn't far behind, taking cover behind a larger boulder. He was ready. The drone came closer, its weapon systems activating with a menacing whine. Lucas's hands were steady as he took aim, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. This wasn't just any drone. It was an enforcer, a machine built for one purpose: to hunt and destroy. And it was coming for him. Lucas didn't wait for it to make the first move. He ran toward it, using the terrain to his advantage, darting between rocks and debris to close the distance. The drone fired first, a blast of energy hitting the snow near Lucas's feet. He jumped, rolling to the side, narrowly avoiding the explosion. His rifle barked again, but the shot missed. He needed something bigger. Without thinking, Lucas reached for the EMP grenade strapped to his waist. It was their only chance. He pulled the pin and threw it, the device soaring through the air before landing just beneath the drone. The drone's engine sputtered, its weapon systems stuttering as the EMP's pulse hit. The drone went still for a moment, hovering in the air. Then it fell from the sky with a deafening crash, its systems fried beyond repair. Lucas exhaled sharply, his heart racing. That was one down, but there were still more to come. He had to think fast. He looked at Zara, who was crouching behind the rocks, watching him with wide eyes. She was safe for now, but the fight was far from over. Another drone appeared over the ridge, this one accompanied by two more enforcers. Lucas's breath hitched. They were coming at full force now, and the chances of getting out of this alive were growing slimmer by the second. "We need to get to the shuttle," Lucas shouted, his voice urgent. "Now." Zara's eyes widened in panic. The shuttle was a few miles away, but getting there was going to be nearly impossible with the drones closing in. They would have to fight their way through, and that meant they were running out of time. The machines advanced, firing relentlessly. Lucas's rifle cracked, hitting one of the drones square in the center, but it barely made a dent. He could feel the pressure mounting. Every second that passed felt like a countdown. They had to reach the shuttle. They had to escape before they were overwhelmed. "Zara, move." Lucas yelled again, running toward her. He grabbed her hand, pulling her to her feet. "We don't have much time." Together, they sprinted toward the open valley, dodging blasts from the drones above. Lucas fired at anything that moved, buying them enough time to reach the shuttle launch point. But the enforcers were still coming, and they were closing in fast. Just as they reached the shuttle, the final enforcer swooped down, its red eyes blazing with fury. Lucas turned to face it, knowing they couldn't make it inside with the machine blocking their way. The shuttle's hatch was just a few feet away, but the enforcer was in their path, its weapons aimed and ready to fire. It was now or never. Lucas pushed Zara toward the shuttle. "Go. I'll hold it off." But Zara wasn't going to leave him behind. "No, we fight together," she shouted, pulling out a small blaster she had hidden in her jacket. Lucas hesitated, but there was no time to argue. The enforcer was upon them. The final battle was here. Together, they fought with everything they had. The enforcer fired, the blasts narrowly missing them as they dodged and weaved, their hearts racing in sync. Lucas's rifle and Zara's blaster combined in a flurry of shots, and finally, with one well-placed shot, the enforcer collapsed, its systems short-circuited by the powerful pulse of their combined fire. The two of them collapsed into the shuttle, their bodies exhausted but their spirits alive. Lucas slammed the door shut, and the shuttle roared to life, lifting off from the snowy surface of the planet. They had made it, but they both knew that this wasn't the end. The alien forces would not stop hunting them. The real fight was just beginning. But for now, They were free. Together. And that was all that mattered. The stars shimmered against the vast blackness of space as the shuttle sped away from the planet's surface. Below them, the snow-covered world grew smaller and smaller, swallowed by the endless expanse of space. But in the quiet of the shuttle, as the engines hummed steadily, Lucas and Zara knew their journey was far from over. Lucas sat in the cockpit, his hand still gripping the controls as his eyes scanned the vast emptiness of space ahead of them. Zara sat beside him, her eyes wide, staring out at the stars, a look of awe and wonder on her face. It was hard to believe they had made it this far. After all they had been through, the danger they had narrowly escaped, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead, it almost felt like a dream. "I can't believe we're really free," Zara whispered, her voice soft, almost like she was speaking to herself. She had been quiet since they left the surface of the planet, and Lucas could tell she was lost in thought. Lucas didn't answer immediately. He could feel the weight of the silence, the emotional exhaustion that clung to both of them. They had survived the final battle, but that didn't mean the fight was over. They had a long road ahead, and the alien forces would stop at nothing to find them. But for now, they were safe. For now, they had each other. "It's hard to believe," Lucas said after a moment, his voice low. He looked over at her, his expression thoughtful. "But we're not out of the woods yet. The king's forces won't stop until they get you back." Zara turned to look at him, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "Not to him. Not to anyone. I've spent too many years as a prisoner. It's time for me to live, Lucas. I want to live." Lucas smiled softly, the exhaustion that had weighed him down for so long lifting just a little at her words. It was strange, hearing her speak with such conviction. When he first found her, she had been broken, a shadow of the woman she was meant to be. But now, there was a fire in her eyes, a strength that had blossomed in the most unlikely of places. He leaned back in his seat, letting the quiet of space wash over him. There was no more running, no more hiding. They had made it out, and now they could start a new life. "What will we do now?" Zara asked, her voice curious. "Where do we go from here?" Lucas thought for a moment. The universe was vast, and they had so many choices. They couldn't stay on the run forever. They needed a place where they could rest, a place where the king's forces couldn't reach them. But more than that, they needed a place where they could heal and rebuild. Lucas knew that the journey ahead would be just as difficult as the one they had left behind. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like they were alone in this fight. "We go where we want," Lucas said with a quiet smile, his gaze never leaving the stars. "Wherever we can find peace, we build a new life, a new beginning." Zara smiled back, her expression softer now. It was clear she was beginning to understand what Lucas meant. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about freedom, about forging a life they both deserved. A life beyond the reach of the alien king who had abandoned her, beyond the control of the AI that had ruled her existence for so long. As the shuttle continued to glide through the vast emptiness of space, Lucas set a course for the outer rim. There were rumors of remote colonies on the edges of the known galaxy, places where the king's influence didn't stretch. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a chance. And that was all they needed. Hours passed in silence as the stars outside seemed to pass by faster, the shuttle cutting through the void with the quiet hum of its engines. Lucas could feel the exhaustion in his bones, but he didn't dare close his eyes. He couldn't let his guard down. Not yet. Not when they were still so far from safety. Zara's voice broke the silence again, her words bringing Lucas back to the present. "Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if everything had been different?" Lucas turned to look at her, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" She looked out the window again, her eyes tracing the stars. "What if the king had never cast me aside? What if I had never been a slave? What if everything had been normal?" Lucas sat quietly for a moment, processing her words. He knew the weight of what she was asking. The scars she carried, both physical and emotional, were not something that could be erased with a simple change of scenery. But Lucas also knew that she had the strength to move forward, to find peace even with the past haunting her. "Life isn't always fair," Lucas said softly, "and sometimes we don't get to choose where we start, but we can choose where we go from here." Zara turned her head to look at him, her eyes searching his face. For a moment, there was silence between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. They both knew what they had been through. They knew the pain, the loss, the battles they had fought. But now, in this moment, they were moving forward, together. "I guess that's true," Zara said quietly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "We do get to choose." Lucas smiled back, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He reached over and gently took her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch. In this vast, unforgiving universe, they had found something precious, something worth fighting for. Hours later, as they approached the outer rim of the galaxy, Lucas glanced over at Zara. The stars outside were fading, the dark emptiness of space giving way to the distant glow of a new world. They had no idea what awaited them on the other side, but for the first time in a long time, they felt like they could face whatever came their way. "I think we're almost there," Lucas said, his voice filled with hope. Zara nodded, her eyes focused on the approaching planet. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was a place where they could begin again, a place where they could heal. The shuttle descended through the atmosphere, the world below bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. They were almost free. The future was still uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. Lucas glanced at Zara one last time before the shuttle touched down. He didn't need to say anything. She already knew. They had both made it out of the darkness together. And now, they would build something new, something worth fighting for. The shuttle doors opened, and they stepped out into the unknown, ready to embrace whatever came next. They were no longer prisoners of their past. They were free. And this was just the beginning.